Hello, everyone. Before I discuss today's topic, I need to share with you something about our woke society. Something I saw on the nightly news, and that something left me sad and angry. An ELCA Lutheran church in Minnesota was seen reciting its Sparkle Creed in church. A creed as anti the Bible as I have ever witnessed. Please research it. I was raised in this denomination when it was called the American Lutheran Church, and at that time it held strictly to the tenets of the Bible. Clearly, this church in Minnesota is now being run by Satan. And I'm sure it's not the only one. Let me be very clear. Many members of my extended family have been led away from truth by being so loyal to this denomination that they'll accept anything preached there, and honestly don't know the Bible well enough to counter that preaching. Please be aware. And please check the Sparkle Creed. You, as my listeners, need to heed this warning. Know the Bible well enough to stand on its words against woke. Getting back to today's topic, to date, we have talked about the end times in the Old Testament and the book of Matthew. Today, then, let's examine what God tells us about those events in the remaining gospel books of Mark, Luke, and John. At this point, I'd like all of you to realize just how important this information must be. God shared it in the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament. We have thus far barely touched the surface of his story. Many churches never teach this or barely even talk about it. With the road our country is traveling today, I think all of us had better know what lies ahead. Obviously, God wanted all to be prepared. Let's begin in the book of Mark, chapter 13, verse 11. Much of what we studied in Matthew is repeated in Mark. I'll skip that, and today I'll only share things you have not heard before. Jesus has told us that we will be persecuted, arrested, and brought to trial. Recently on our television news, there has been a lot of talk about Christians being under surveillance by the FBI. Jesus says, quote, "Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit," end quote. Continuing in verse 12, we are told, quote, "Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death," end quote. Can you even imagine that? In verse 18, Jesus says, quote, those will be days of distress unequaled from the beginning when God created the world until now, and never to be equaled again. God has promised to shorten those days, or even the elect would not survive. Let's move on to the 21st chapter of Luke, beginning at verse 12. As we heard in Mark, Jesus reminds us that in the end times, people will be persecuted and brought before kings and governors on account of his name. Listen to verse 13, though. Quote, "This will result in your being witnesses to them." What? So all of this has a purpose? Listen to this. The word spoken to us via the Holy Spirit will be so powerful that none of the adversaries will be able to resist or contradict them. And those words will result in a witness that may save even the vilest among those doing the persecuting. Isn't God's love amazing? But let me be very clear. That love isn't without an end for those who choose to travel an anti-God path. Consider these words Joseph spoke in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, when his brothers had sold him. Quote, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." End quote. Might this then be your job and mine in the end times? Who knows? Verse 23 of Luke 21 says, "There will be great distress in the land and wrath against God's people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken prisoners to all nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled." As we heard previously, there will be war in Israel. Men will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Verse 34 carries with it a warning. "Be careful, for your hearts will be weighed down with dissipation, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life. And that day will close in on you unexpectedly, like a trap. For it will come upon all those who live on the face of the whole earth." Finally, let's take a look at the book of John. John is Jesus' beloved disciple who cared for Jesus' mother Mary for the rest of her life, as instructed by Jesus from the cross. John also was given the vision by Jesus described in the book of Revelation. In the book of John, he talks a great deal about Jesus, his friend. But he does mention the end times. In verse 25 of chapter 5, he informs us that, quote, "A time is coming, and now has come, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live." Verse 28 says, quote, "Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good will rise to live, and those who have done evil will rise to be condemned." Notice first that all will rise. Now let's read verse 28 again. "Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good will rise to live, and those who have done evil will rise to be condemned." Notice that this verse does not say those who believe will rise to live. It says those who have done good will live, and those who have done evil will be condemned. This is why I have believed, since I read the entire Bible, that belief alone is not enough. Our initial faith has to grow, and we have, according to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, work to do that God prepared in advance for us. What work have you done for God that He chose you to do? Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this book-by-book study of the end times so far. And in the midst of a society of Americans who are today blatantly disobeying everything God taught and everything He expects, I pray you realize God gave us end times information throughout the Bible for a reason. It's not there to just sit on a coffee table as a trophy, but to read, study, and witness from. Join me next week when the Apostle Paul shares his God-breathed words with us in books and verses about the end times. See you Thursday.